So investors and employees are often looking for the startup that are using modern, reliable and popular technologies that are up to the mark, and it can be a signal of a startup technical capabilities and potential for the success in the future.
Hello everyone, this is your host Umair Atiq and welcome to our podcast where we intend to help entrepreneurs and developers make informed decisions about the technology they use to build their businesses. So in today's episode, we will be discussing how to choose the right technology stack for the tech startup in 2023. Picking the right technical stack is critical for the success of any startup, but it can be especially challenging for companies which completely rely on technology for their products. To address this topic, today we have with us in our panel Atif Riaz. He is a technical lead here at Xgrid with a previous experience with multiple various startups. We also have Anis Iqbal here with me, who is experienced in developing large-scale applications and has helped growing businesses for various enterprise softwares. Last but not the least, we have Sajawal here. Sajawal is a senior software engineer here at Xgrid with past entrepreneur experiences. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you, man.
So, without further ado, let's move on right on to the first question. So, Anis, the emphasis of this episode is on choosing the right technology stack for your startup, right? What are the challenges, let's say, if you choose the wrong technology stack?
Well, thank you, Umair. And I think that's a great question and a great start to this conversation. The technology stack of a software can really make or break the success of the software or a product. The right technology stack can provide the scalability, the reliability, and the security of the solution, which are essential components of the business success. It can also help reduce the cost, enable the faster developments, giving startup an edge over their competitors. Additionally, the right tech stack can offer the flexibility so that every software can really adopt the needs of their customer. With the wrong technology stack, we are looking at the slackened time to the market, late deployment and development processes. Those are very hectic and the time consuming and the costly fixes. So I think that is very critical to have a right technology stack in your product and business.
That makes sense. So, Anis, I believe it's important to choose a technology stack that maybe supports the need of a project and allows for efficient development time.
Exactly. And yes, it's not just about the initial development of the product, but it ensures that the company is able to create a robust and efficient solution which is well suited for the target market. So having a right technology stack will make it easier for you to scale up very quickly, and you can reach to the market very early, which is essential for the startup success. So these days, the startups are already facing a massive resource crunch as well. If the technology stack is really difficult to maintain, then it can become the cumbersome and taxing to keep the product running smoothly and thereby draining the startup resources.
That's really interesting. So, not only it is important to choose a right technology stack that can support the initial development of the product, but it's also important to consider the long-term scalability and maybe maintainability.
Yes, choosing the right technology stack is crucial because it can impact the speed of development, the scalability, and the maintenance of the overall product, the attractiveness of the startup to the potential investors and the employees. So here I want to conclude one final reason before that I can think of is that the attractiveness of the startup to the potential investors and the customers and employees. So investors and employees are often looking for the startup that are using modern, reliable and popular technologies that are up to the mark, and it can be a signal of a startup technical capabilities and potential for the success in the future.
Well, that's a lot of great information, Anis. Thank you so much. And this establishes why it is so crucial for a startup to choose their stacks wisely. With this, let's move on to the next part of the discussion and let's talk about the actual steps involved in choosing the right stack for your company. So, Sajawal, from your standpoint, why do you think the idea is an important factor to consider while choosing a technical stack?
Yeah, thank you so much, Umair. I would love to address this actually. So when I actually say idea, it doesn't necessarily mean that the idea itself, but actually the requirement analysis that we do when we are actually studying the idea. So a requirement analysis is basically the procedure in which you try to come up with the reasonings and the ideas behind that specific use case you're going to implement, right? And this helps you understand the needs and goals of that specific business, which in turn helps you in finding the right stack for that company. So for example, you can take an example of a startup that is a mobile first startup, right? And they want to build an application for the business. So in that specific scenario, the specific needs of the business are to be very good in their UIs, be very fast in their specific native performances, and they also want their backend to be like very data manipulating, data handling. So in that specific case, for the front end, they would go with Flutter because it basically offers all of those specific things that they want for the business. But for the backends, they would then want to go to something like Hadoop because it is basically a processing system that helps you process multiple amounts of data, basically the big data, and in a very real time kind of thing. So that's my take on that.
Okay, so just for our viewers, this is actually new to me. You mentioned Hadoop here. What actually is Hadoop?
Yeah, so as I told, Hadoop is basically a platform that basically uses concepts like MapReduce and things like that to actually enable manipulation of big data. So it has like these so many systems that are well maintained, and they have this procedure through it. They process that data in a parallel way and enables you to process and store and do calculation of that data. So it's basically from Apache, and they have this system in which they do all of this in very real time.
That is great, Sajawal. As I understand, it's not just the requirements that come into play. We also need to consider a set of important factors while we dig a bit more into the decision making. For me personally, I always consider maybe cost, time to market, scalability, its community and sustainability. So coming to Atif, how do you think cost is an important factor in this decision?
Thank you so much, Umair. Before I answer that, I want to appreciate the really technically educative and engaging conversation that's been going on so far. And I think, yeah, indeed, that is the big question, right? When you are choosing a tech stack for your startup, and there is a lot of stuff that you have to consider. And like in this list, I think cost has to trump overall the list. Because yeah, let's face it, time is money. When we're talking about startups, they are faced by limited budgets. They have resource constraints at times as well. So cost is a very important thing that they have to consider while picking a tech stack. Okay, so as we get into some specific examples of this, if you are picking a tech stack for your startup and you end up choosing a very extensive and difficult to maintain tech stack, then eventually what's going to happen is that it will have a serious negative impact on your product in terms of that you will have a huge technical debt to deal with right from the start. So therefore, again, very crucial to consider cost while picking your tech stack. So let's take another case into consideration. You've chosen a tech stack that's unique or probably a new technology in the market. Now, once you do that, you will eventually need resources to work on your application or product in the end. So now this is the problem that you're going to face. You're not going to be able to find good resources easily. You're going to have problem attracting quality resources, and then most of these resources are going to be high valued resources. So again, these are some factors that you need to consider while you're picking a tech stack for your startup. So one third factor that I'd also like to talk about under cost is basically if your idea requires you to utilize a licensed tech and you need to integrate that into your application, now you have recurring bills and fees to pay as well. So that adds to your list. So lastly, I think based on these few things that I just discussed, and I'm sure a lot more, cost has to be a very important factor while you're picking a tech stack for your startup.
Thank you, Atif. Now let's talk about the time to market factor. And Anis, I would like your thoughts on this. How this factor impacts anything at all.
We need to understand that time to market is important for startups because it can mean the difference between the success and the failure. The faster a startup can get their product to the market, the sooner they can generate revenue, they can make their strong footing in their industry. So by choosing the right technology stack, startups can ensure that their product and service is ready to be used and launched quickly and efficiently. This can help save time, this can help save you money and cost, while also allowing the startups to develop a better and more successful product or a service. So as an example, if you're especially anxious to get your product in the public eye, a mainstream framework might be a way to go, simply because it's easier to find the mainstream devs, React devs, easy to find, Next.js devs, not so much. Go too niche with your stack and you risk finding yourself in a tight spot in case you urgently require more hands on the deck in the mid-sprint. Also, it's important for the startups to strike a balance between the speed and the long-term sustainability. So choosing a technology stack that is too early and or that is in the experimental stage can be risky, as it may not have the proper documentation and the support required for the development and early delivery.
Okay, so Atif, we have heard a lot about this term called scale. How do you think scalability plays its part?
Thank you, Umair, for that question again. I think, like we discussed earlier, cost has definitely to be the most important thing, I believe, that you have to account for while picking a tech stack. I would definitely rate scalability as the second most important thing that you have to consider. If you're a startup, you're all about growth. You have to grow in the end. If you are a SaaS product, you have to, from day one, think of a point in time where you will have to interact with millions of users every second. So essentially, as a startup, you have to pick a stack that facilitates you to grow, your business to grow. You have to choose a tech stack that can handle high traffic and that can process large amounts of data. Scalability is also a very important factor, considering the fact that when you're starting off as a startup and you're in the first rounds of building your product. That's a phase where you're actually building the foundations of the entire product, right? So I think scalability is a very important factor that has to be discussed right from the first day, so that you're prepared for the time when your users are expanding exponentially suddenly, and then you have the infrastructure to basically provide them services. So scalability is not just a limitation for young startups. Scalability is also a limitation for big companies that are struggling to get their products out there. A very fine example is of Disney Plus, they saw a crash on their first launch date, and according to one of their executives, the response they got exceeded their expectations. So that's something you have to be prepared for, and that's something that relates with scalability in the end. How scalable is your product in the end? How vast can it grow, and stuff like that.
I agree, completely agree. Indeed, scalability is extremely important here. And if you're planning to have millions of users someday, start thinking about it today. Right. So, by the way, Anis, we also see a lot of people saying community and the element of being futuristic also matters a lot when you're choosing a stack. How true is that?
So that is actually a true statement. A strong tech community can provide the support and the resources for the development team, while sustainability ensures that the chosen technology will be around for a long haul. A strong tech community can be a valuable resource for the startup. It can provide the support, the documentations, the resources that really help the development team build and maintain their product efficiently. On the other hand, if a startup chooses a technology stack that is too weak or non-existent tech community, they may struggle to find the technical support and resources when they are in the need of them. As for the sustainability, it's important for the startups to choose the technologies that are likely to be around for a long term. If a startup builds their product on a technology that becomes outdated or obsolete, they may struggle to maintain their product and update their product as per their customer needs.
Thank you for putting light on this, Anis. Okay, so the last point we have is compatibility. So, Sajawal, how do you think this factor is important when choosing a stack?
Yeah, thank you so much, Umair, for asking this question. So compatibility is actually often overlooked, and I think it's a really important factor. So let's take an example of a web application that needs to implement payment gateways, right? So for that kind of application, if they have chosen a technology stack that is not very compatible, they probably might not be able to integrate that payment gateway, and then the value that they're gonna get out of that specific payment gateway, they're gonna never get it. Similarly, an example of this is that, for example, you're working with a legacy system and you're building a startup that is based on the systems that were being used before. So if you're using a technology stack that is not very compatible, then if you want to build on top of those specific products, you probably might not be able to, and then you'll have to face this issue where compatibility becomes a hindrance. So this is why I think compatibility is a really important factor, and you should consider it whenever you're choosing a technology stack.
Okay, so there is one more factor, and that's I believe could be very important. That's we can say prioritizing all of these factors, Atif. How do you think this can play a part?
Well, definitely. I think before I move on to prioritization, I think even the business people always, you'll find them using the term opportunity cost. So everything has an opportunity cost in the end, right? So when you're picking a tech stack for your startup, you have to understand the trade-offs. You have to understand which tech stack proves to be the best fit for your business or your startup in the end. So like I said, every startup has their own goals, and whatever tech stack in the end they pick up has to be well in line with those goals. They have to identify and realize the factors that matter the most to their product and their business. And I think, yeah, that's how they will get to the best tech stack for their business.
Okay, guys, so let's take this conversation to another level and make it more interactive and more interesting. So what we'll do here is I'll play a startup founder. I have an idea, I'll present it to you, and you will have to apply all of these factors that we have discussed so far and come up with a technology stack.
Perfect.
So I'll start with Atif. So the first problem that we have is a startup that is building a mobile app for tracking and managing personal finances. For this, the technology stack should be chosen with an emphasis on security and data protection, as users will be trusting the application with sensitive financial information. That's very important here. The second thing is the technology stack should also be chosen with an eye towards compatibility with popular mobile operating system and the ability to easily integrate with financial institution and other financial services. What's gonna be your stack?
Interesting. I think this is definitely a very interesting part to this conversation that we've been having. So we're talking about creating an application for managing personal finances. Yeah, so when picking any tech stack, there are three main things that you have to pick. To start with, you have to pick a database, which is the backbone of your application. Moving on, you have to pick a backend in which you're going to build your APIs. And then eventually you need to have client-facing front-end applications. Those can be mobile applications or web applications. So we'll talk about each of these individually. To start with the database, I think from the problem you just explained, we will definitely need an SQL database over here. The reason being that SQL is a relational database, and the relations are going to matter a lot over here because this is going to be a lot of data, and this is like security is also a concern over here. So we want those relations to be really defined. Therefore, we're going to use an SQL database. Then moving on to backend, we can choose from multiple languages or technologies, I'd say, but the one I would go with for the sake of this conversation is basically Golang. The reason being that Golang is very, very efficient when it comes to parallel programming. So considering that we will have to do a lot of transactions and we will have to do them back and forth. So I think Golang would be a good backend for this. Another reason I pick Golang is because of test-driven development, which is a very advanced new practice that is being followed in the industry. The idea over there is that instead of writing code first and then writing test cases, you do it the other way around. You write the test case first, you let it fail, and that's when you write the actual code and then pass that test case, and eventually that's how you build the whole API. So I think Golang could be the most ideal backend for this application. So now that we've picked a database and a backend, the only thing left is the front end. So for front end, considering that we've already discussed scalability and all that, eventually this might be multiple applications, and this will definitely have a web client-facing application as well, which can be an admin dashboard, which can also be a dashboard for the customer to manage their finances on a bigger screen. But essentially, I think the core application is going to be a native mobile application. The reason I say this is because for the sake of this conversation and this particular scenario, I think cost and time are not going to be much of a limitation. Therefore, the best thing to focus on is the best use of device hardware. And I think considering that native mobile applications might just do the trick, we could make better use of stuff like location. We could make better use of stuff like carrier services, where you will be using SMS alerts and stuff like that to confirm transactions and everything. So yeah, I think that's my tech stack: SQL, Golang, and then native mobile applications on the front end.
Thank you, Atif. That sounds good to me. So coming to Anis, the problem I have for you is, let's say I'm a startup owner and I am building a ride-hailing mobile application. So for this, the technology stack should be chosen with an emphasis on scalability and the ability to handle high volume of users and interactions. Additionally, easy integration with third-party frameworks for app services like maps for navigation and stuff, and for obviously payment gateways, and for messaging and chat services.
That's actually a great idea, and I think if the cost is a main factor in this startup idea, then I think we need to go with the cross-platform development, because on that side, again, the Flutter or the React Native are two very mature technologies, and we can easily find the devs, and we can develop for multiple platforms. We can include the web, we can include the Android iOS as well. So that can really help us to reach our targeted market very early, and we can enable the faster developments. We can easily deploy it on the multiple platforms. So that really helps if you are launching the MVP and cost is limited. So the overall budget of the project is actually limited. So if we are looking at the scalability of the project, the idea, and the integration with the third-party applications, though these are well supported actually in the cross-platform frameworks that are Flutter and React Native or some other cross-platform frameworks, but I'd likely to go with the native one, because in the native app you can really get the benefits of the native system, the native APIs. You can develop platform-specific experiences for the end users, and since we are clearly seeing the idea that it targets millions of users maybe in the future, so we need to have a very good experience for the end users. So to ensure that, the API should support a high load of requests on that end. So maybe on that end we can go with the Node.js for that solution, so that API can handle multiple requests efficiently. And to handle the database operations, I'll go with the NoSQL approach, because in the start, if we are not so sure about how the product is going to survive in the market, we really want to support the use cases, for example, the guest user login, and we don't need to create the profiles of the actual users. So, and I'd also want to support the multiple car types, and so I think NoSQL would do the work. So on the front end, we have a flexible integration of the third-party frameworks with the native APIs. We can integrate Google Maps, we can integrate the payment gateways, and on the backend, Node can really handle a lot of requests. We can create multiple services that can target each module of the application, but that is actually not a concern in the MVP. That is in the very early stage of the development. So yeah.
Okay, just so to summarize, we have for front end you are going with native,
Yes.
and for back end you are going with
Node.js, yeah.
Node.js, and for database we are going with NoSQL.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, so moving on to Sajawal, and I have a very interesting idea for you here.
I would love to listen.
So, a startup that is building a SaaS platform for a task management application. For this, the technology stack should be chosen with an emphasis on building a multi-platform UI. Now, this is very important here.
That's right.
Additionally, compatibility to integrate with third-party services into your product with a responsive and interactive UI. So now we have to emphasize here on multiple things.
Yeah. So the way that I hear it, let's break the problem down into the requirements of the whole system. So as far as I've understood the problem, the startup, I think there are like 3 to 4 important things that we need to consider in this specific part. The first one I think is number one, an attractive and interactive UI. That's the first thing that you need, and then it should be present on basically every platform, because that's what the requirement of a to-do or a task management app is, that it should be present basically on all platforms. So if you're working on a laptop, you need to constantly change your to-dos, and similarly if you're working on a phone, you can access that. Makes sense. Then it should also have interactions or compatibility with basically every other extension that is on the market. So maybe you want to integrate Google Doc into your notes or into your tasks and things like that. So with that, the technology stack that is basically on top of my head for this kind of problems is number one, React.js firstly, with React Native for covering that multi-platform portion of that. Number one, React.js for web is basically one of the most hottest technologies we have currently, with the most developers available, and it has this front-end compatibility which allows you to develop amazing user interfaces, and the development time and cost is also very low. So if you are building something on the website using React.js, then it makes much more sense to use React Native and not Flutter for cross-platform development, because then you have this less overhead of hiring a developer that is equipped with Dart and things like that, so it saves cost. Maybe your React JS developer can kind of like move to React Native and develop that for you. So that's going to help you a lot. So first layer, the UI layer, I think can be covered from that portion. Secondly, we have the backend side. So obviously the most used backend with React and React Native is basically Node.js. And the second reason is that Node.js basically has this, extensions and libraries which help you integrate with multiple platforms as well. So if you want to integrate, a third-party service, maybe Google Doc into your thing, or maybe Slack integrations and Jira integration into your specific task management app, you would want to use Node.js because it has extensions that's like the most stable in the market at the moment and has the maximum backing that you can have. And it's based on JS as well. So the person who is doing that React thing can also kind of like be equipped, if he's a full stack developer, he can be equipped with Node.js. So you can use that as well. So another important thing that is in this specific product is that you would want to have this instantaneous exchange of information, so that if you change a specific thing on your cell phone, it should instantly reflect on your devices, other devices as well. So for that specific thing, you can use things like stream builders and streams, kind of like these things, and then socket extension as well. So you change something on your cell phone, and the socket is connected with your database and instantly uploads basically all the data into other devices as well. So you can use that specific concept of Node.js to implement this kind of behavior. And lastly, for the database, I believe without any doubt it's NoSQL. And the reason for that is obviously when you are integrating different kind of extensions into your platform, every extension would have different kind of data incoming. And for that specific case, you're going to define your data sets and your data shape. And so it's constantly evolving. So in that scenario, it's best, I would recommend MongoDB because it's basically the most popular one in basically all of the scenarios. So in my opinion, the best stack that you can choose for this kind of use case and with all these requirements listed would be obviously React.js and React Native for the front-end side, and then for the back-end Node.js. And finally, MongoDB, the NoSQL database for the database portion.
Thank you, Sajawal, for explaining this in detail. And with that, let's wrap this up. So Atif, Anis, and Sajawal, thanks a lot for joining us today. This was a very interesting session, and I'm sure the audience get to learn a lot about choosing the right stack for their tech startup.
Thank you, man.
Thank you, Umair. Have a nice day, everyone.